You get $50, Dad. My son Brandon smirked at me while tossing a crumpled bill onto the mahogany conference table. He was already mentally spending his mother's $200 million fortune. His wife Vanessa laughed a cold, sharp sound that echoed in the silent law office. I sat there in my worn flannel shirt and work boots, and I did not say a word. I simply smoothed out the $50 bill and placed it in my chest pocket. I looked at the lawyer, Mr. Blackwood, and nodded. "Read the next page," I said softly. Brandon rolled his eyes and checked his Rolex. "There is no next page, old man. She left you lunch money. Now get out." But Mr. Blackwood did not move. He adjusted his glasses and looked at my son with a gaze that could freeze water. "Actually, Mr. Bennett, there is an addendum, and I suggest you sit down for this. What happened in the next 5 minutes would erase the smirk from my son's face forever. Before I tell you how my own flesh and blood tried to bury me, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stay silent while someone underestimated you. My name is Harold Bennett. I am 73 years old, and for the last 20 years, my family has treated me like a ghost. To my son Brandon, I was just the failure of a father who drove a 1998 Ford pickup truck and lived in a small wooden cabin on the edge of the estate. He saw my calloused hands and my simple clothes, and he assumed I was nothing more than a glorified gardener. He did not know that the estate he walked on, the company he bragged about, and the millions he expected to inherit were all built on the foundation of my sacrifice. It started on a Tuesday morning in the Hamptons. The sky was a heavy bruised gray that matched the feeling in my chest. I was driving my old Ford truck down the long, winding driveway of the estate. The gravel crunched loudly under my tires, a stark contrast to the smooth purr of the Bentleys and Rolls-Royces lining the manicured lawn. This was the funeral of my ex-wife, Catherine. We had been divorced for 2 decades, but no one knew that she still called me every Sunday night just to hear my voice. No one knew that our divorce was a strategic move to protect her and the assets from a lawsuit that Brandon had caused in his reckless youth. I pulled my truck into a small gap between a silver Porsche and a black limousine. The engine sputtered and died with a loud bang that made several guests turn their heads. I took a deep breath. I gripped the steering wheel for a moment, gathering the strength to face them. I stepped out of the truck. My suit was clean, but it was old. It was the same charcoal suit I had worn to Brandon's graduation 20 years ago. It was a little tight in the shoulders now, and the fabric had lost its sheen, but it was the best I had. I had not taken 3 steps before a large man in a black security uniform stepped in my path. He held up a hand. "Deliveries are around the back, sir. The catering entrance is through the service gate." I looked him in the eye. "I am not catering. I am Harold Bennett. I am here for the funeral." The guard looked me up and down. His eyes lingered on my scuffed work boots, which I had tried to polish with black shoe paste. "I do not have a Harold Bennett on the VIP list. You need to move this truck. The owners do not want junk vehicles cluttering the driveway." Before I could respond, a voice cut through the damp air like a knife. "Let him in." The voice was familiar, but it held no warmth. I looked up to see my son Brandon walking toward us. He looked immaculate in a custom Italian suit that probably cost more than my truck and my cabin combined. His hair was perfectly styled and his shoes shone like mirrors. He did not look at me with love. He looked at me with the annoyance one might have for a stain on a new carpet. "Brandon," I said quietly, "I am sorry for your loss. Your mother was a great woman." Brandon stopped 5 feet away from me as if he were afraid my poverty might be contagious. He did not return the sentiment. He just hissed through his teeth. "What the hell are you doing here, Dad? You and Mom divorced 20 years ago. You have no business being here. Do not embarrass me in front of the investors. There are important people here." I felt a sting in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. I learned a long time ago that showing emotion to Brandon only gave him ammunition. I just came to pay my respects, son. She was my wife for 30 years. Brandon laughed a short, bitter sound. She was your ex-wife, and she pitied you. That is the only reason she let you live in that shack on the edge of the property. Now, if you are going to stay, do not talk to anyone. Do not tell anyone you are my father. Just sit in the back and try not to look like a beggar. He turned his back on me and walked away toward a group of men in suits, immediately changing his demeanor to one of charming grief. I watched him go. I remembered when he was a boy, and he used to run to me when he scraped his knee. I remembered teaching him to fish in the pond behind the main house. I wondered where that boy had gone and who this cold stranger was. I walked toward the rows of white chairs set up on the lawn. The casket was at the front, covered in white lilies. Catherine loved lilies. I remembered planting the first lily bulbs in this garden 30 years ago, with my own hands back when this land was just a swamp that I bought for pennies. I started to walk toward the front row. There was an empty seat near the aisle. I wanted to be close to her one last time. Suddenly, a hand with long manicured nails grabbed my arm. It was Vanessa, my daughter-in-law. She was wearing a black dress that was more appropriate for a cocktail party than a funeral, and her face was hidden behind large, dark sunglasses. She smelled of expensive perfume and entitlement. "You cannot sit there," she whispered aggressively. Her grip on my arm was surprisingly strong. "That is for immediate family and VIP guests." I looked at her. "I am immediate family, Vanessa. I am Brandon's father." She sneered, her lip curling in disgust. "You are the past, Harold. You are an embarrassment. Look at you. You smell like sawdust and old mothballs. Brandon is closing a deal with the senator today. We cannot have you sitting next to us looking like the help." She pointed a sharp finger toward the very back of the gathering, where the catering staff and the housekeepers were standing. "Your place is back there. Do not make a scene or I will have security remove you." I looked at the empty chair in the front row, then back at Vanessa. I could have argued. I could have told her that I paid for the very dress she was wearing through the alimony checks I sent Catherine every month, which she secretly funneled into Brandon's lifestyle. But I chose silence. I nodded slowly. I walked to the back row and stood next to Maria, the head housekeeper. Maria looked at me with sad, tearful eyes. She reached out and squeezed my hand. "I am sorry, Mr. Harold," she whispered. "I know you loved her." "Thank you, Maria," I replied softly. I stood there for the entire hour as the priest spoke about Catherine. I watched Brandon in the front row, dabbing his eyes with a silk handkerchief whenever the cameras were pointed at him. I watched Vanessa scrolling on her phone hidden behind her purse. They did not cry for Catherine. They were performing. They were waiting. I knew exactly what they were waiting for. They were waiting for the reading of the will. They were waiting for the $200 million. The funeral ended, and the guests began to filter toward the reception tent, where champagne and caviar were being served. I did not go. I knew I was not welcome. I walked back to my truck. As I opened the creaking door, Brandon appeared behind me. He did not look sad. He looked energized. He looked like a hunter who had just taken down big game. "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. His voice was sharp. "Mr. Blackwood's office in Manhattan. Be there." I looked at him surprised. "Why?" "You made it clear I am not family." Brandon smirked. "It is a formality, Dad. The lawyers said everyone named in the will has to be present. Mom probably left you her old gardening tools, or maybe she forgave a month of rent on your check. Just show up so we can sign the papers and get this over with. Do not be late. I have a yacht to put a deposit on by noon." He slapped the hood of my truck twice, a patronizing gesture, and walked away whistling. I watched him go. I felt a heavy stone in my gut. He thought he had already won. He thought the money was his. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. It coughed and sputtered before roaring to life. As I drove away from the mansion, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw the empire I had built. I saw the home where I had raised my son. And I made a silent promise to Catherine. I would teach him the lesson I should have taught him years ago. The next morning, I drove into the city. The traffic in Manhattan was brutal, and my old truck with its manual transmission was a struggle to maneuver between the aggressive taxis. I arrived at the office of Blackwood and Associates at 9:55. The building was a tower of glass and steel reaching into the clouds. The lobby smelled of expensive leather and intimidation. I took the elevator to the 45th floor. When the doors opened, I stepped onto plush carpet that felt deeper than the grass in my yard. The receptionist looked at me over her glasses. Her nose wrinkled slightly. "Deliveries are on the freight elevator, sir." "I am not a delivery man," I said for the second time in 24 hours. "I am Harold Bennett. I have a meeting with Mr. Blackwood." She checked her computer skepticism written all over her face. Then she blinked. "Oh, yes. Room A, down the hall." She pointed without looking up again. I walked down the corridor, passing portraits of stern-looking men in oil paintings. I reached the conference room at the end of the hall. The door was heavy solid oak. I pushed it open. Brandon and Vanessa were already there. They sat at the head of a long table that looked like it could seat 30 people. Brandon had his feet up on the polished wood. He was wearing another new suit, this one navy blue. Vanessa was next to him, tapping furiously on a tablet. When I entered, Brandon did not take his feet down. "Well, look who made it," he said loudly. "Park the truck round back, Dad. I hope it is not leaking oil on the pavement." I ignored him and pulled out the chair at the opposite end of the table. I sat down and folded my hands. "I am here, Brandon. Let us get this done." Vanessa looked up from her screen. "Try not to touch anything, Harold. That chair is imported leather. It stains easily." I remained silent. I looked out the window at the city skyline. I had built skyscrapers in this city 30 years ago. I knew the steel in these buildings better than they knew the clothes on their backs. But to them, I was just a stain on the leather. The door opened, and Mr. Blackwood entered. He was a man of 60 with silver hair and a face that revealed nothing. He carried a thick leather binder. He nodded to Brandon and Vanessa, then he looked at me. He held my gaze for a second longer than necessary, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Good morning. Let us begin." Mr. Blackwood sat at the center of the table. He opened the binder. The sound of the papers turning was the only noise in the room. Brandon finally took his feet off the table, but he leaned forward with greedy impatience. "Skip the preamble, Blackwood. We all know the assets. Just get to the distribution part. I have a meeting with the yacht broker at 12. Mr. Blackwood looked at Brandon over the rim of his spectacles. "Mr. Bennett, legal protocol must be followed. I will read the summary of assets first." He began to read. The list was staggering. The estate in the Hamptons valued at $45 million. The penthouse in Manhattan valued at $20 million. The investment portfolio valued at $85 million. The antique collection. The jewelry. The commercial real estate holdings. With every $1 million mentioned, Brandon and Vanessa held hands tighter. Their eyes grew wider and brighter. They were practically vibrating with greed. They were not mourning Catherine. They were celebrating her death. They were doing mental math, calculating how much power they were about to have. And finally, Mr. Blackwood said, his voice steady. "We come to the distribution of assets." Brandon leaned forward, licking his lips. "Here we go," he whispered to Vanessa. Mr. Blackwood cleared his throat. "To the local animal shelter, Catherine has bequeathed the sum of $100,000. Brandon waved his hand dismissively. "Fine, fine. Tax write-off. Keep going. To her loyal housekeeper, Maria, she leaves the sum of $200,000 to ensure her retirement. Brandon frowned. That is a bit excessive for a maid, but whatever. It is pocket change. Get to the main beneficiary. Mr. Blackwood turned a page. His eyes darted to me for a brief second. To my ex-husband, Harold Bennett. Brandon burst out laughing. He slammed his hand on the table. Here it comes. Brace yourself, Dad. Maybe she left you the old lawnmower so you can finally do your job properly. Or maybe she left you her old car so you can scrap that piece of junk you drive. Mr. Blackwood waited for the laughter to die down. He continued reading in a monotone voice. To my ex-husband, Harold Bennett, I leave the sum of $50 in cash. The room went silent. Then Brandon exploded into laughter again. He laughed so hard he choked. $50, he wheezed. $50. Oh, that is rich. That is perfect. She hated you even from the grave, Dad. She wanted to make sure you knew exactly what you are worth. $50. Vanessa was giggling, covering her mouth with her manicured hand. That is actually cruel, she said, though she sounded delighted. But I guess it is fair. He did live on her land for free for years. Mr. Blackwood reached into a small envelope attached to the file. He pulled out a single crisp $50 bill. He slid it across the long mahogany table. It stopped right in front of me. I looked at the bill. Ulysses S. Grant stared back at me. I felt the heat rise in my neck. It was a calculated insult. In legal terms, leaving a specific small amount is a way to prove the person was not forgotten by accident, making it nearly impossible to contest the will. It was a final slap in the face. Brandon stood up. He walked over to me, picked up the bill, and threw it at my chest. It fluttered down to my lap. Take it, Dad. Go buy yourself a nice dinner. Or maybe half a tank of gas for that truck. Now get out of here. The rest of this meeting is for the real heirs. We have big business to discuss. I picked up the bill. I folded it neatly in half, then in half again. I placed it in the pocket of my flannel shirt right over my heart. I did not stand up. I did not leave. I looked at Mr. Blackwood. Is that all? I asked. My voice was calm, but it filled the room. Brandon groaned. Are you deaf, old man? You got your 50. Now leave. You are trespassing. I ignored him. I kept my eyes on the lawyer. I asked you a question, Mr. Blackwood. Is that the end of the document, Mr. Blackwood adjusted his glasses. He looked at Brandon, then he looked at me. No, Mr. Bennett. That is not all. Brandon paused. What do you mean? What else is there? Did she leave him the toaster too? Mr. Blackwood turned the page. The sound was loud in the sudden silence of the room. However, the lawyer read, the entirety of my remaining estate, including all properties, liquid assets, stocks, and bonds, totaling approximately $200 million, shall be transferred immediately into the Bennett Family Irrevocable Trust. Brandon smiled. A trust. Okay, fine. Better for taxes. I am the trustee, obviously. Just give me the papers to sign so I can access the funds. Mr. Blackwood shook his head slightly. No, Mr. Bennett, you are not the trustee. Brandon froze. What? Who is? Vanessa. No. Then who? Some bank. I can fire them. I want control. Mr. Blackwood looked directly at Brandon. The document states that the sole protector and executor of the Bennett Family Trust, with absolute and final authority over all disbursements, allowances, and asset management, is Harold Bennett. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. You could hear the traffic 45 floors down. Brandon blinked. He looked at the lawyer. He looked at me. Then he looked back at the lawyer. He laughed a nervous, twitchy sound. That is a joke. You are reading it wrong. It says Harold Bennett is the beneficiary of $50. It cannot say he controls the money. That is impossible. He is a gardener. He is a nobody. Mr. Blackwood turned the document around and slid it toward Brandon. Read it yourself. Brandon grabbed the paper. His hands were shaking. He scanned the lines frantically, his eyes darting back and forth. His face, which had been flushed with victory, slowly drained of all color. He turned pale, then white, then a sickly shade of gray. "No," he whispered. "This is a mistake. This is a forgery. She would never do this. She knew I needed this money. She promised me." "She promised you nothing, Brandon," I said. I finally spoke. I stood up slowly. The chair scraped against the floor. I walked toward the window and looked out at the city. For 20 years, I let you believe I was weak. I let you believe I was poor. I let you treat me like dirt on your shoe because I wanted to see if you would ever become a man on your own. I wanted to see if you would ever show kindness without expecting a reward. I turned back to face him. He was slumped in his chair, looking like a child who had dropped his ice cream. Vanessa was staring at me with her mouth open, her eyes wide with terror. "You failed, Brandon," I said. "You failed every test. You treated your mother like a bank account, and you treated me like a burden. And now you are right about one thing." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the $50 bill. I tossed it onto the table in front of him. "You are the one who needs lunch money, because until I say so, you do not get a single dime of that $200 million. Brandon looked at the bill. Then he looked at me. And for the first time in his life, he did not see a gardener. He saw the man who held his entire future in the palm of his hand. And he was terrified. Mr. Blackwood cleared his throat. "Now that the executor is present, we have some immediate business to discuss regarding the trust's current liabilities. Specifically, the $5 million in gambling debts that you, Mr. Brandon Bennett, have accumulated with certain unauthorized lenders. Lenders who were promised payment today." Brandon began to sweat. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Dad, you have to sign. They will kill me." I looked at him. I looked at the $50, and I sat back down in the leather chair. "Read the next page, Mr. Blackwood," I said. "I am in no hurry." "This is insane!" Brandon shouted, his voice cracking like a teenager's. He slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the crystal water pitcher. "You are telling me that this old man who has lived in a shed for 20 years is in charge of $200 million. He can't even balance a checkbook. He pays for everything with cash he keeps in a coffee can." I watched my son unravel. The veneer of the successful businessman was peeling away, revealing the panicked, spoiled child underneath. He paced the length of the conference room, his expensive Italian shoes squeaking on the hardwood floor. He looked like a trapped animal. "Mr. Bennett, please sit down," Mr. Blackwood said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Hysterics will not change the legal reality of this document. Your mother was of sound mind and body when she drafted this addendum 6 months ago. We have video evidence of the signing should you wish to challenge her competency. But I must warn you, there is a no contest clause. If you file a lawsuit to challenge the validity of this trust, you are automatically disinherited. You will get zero, not even $50. Brandon froze. He turned to look at the lawyer, his chest heaving. "So I just have to accept this. I have to beg him for my own money." "It is not your money, Brandon," I said from the end of the table. My voice was low, rough, from years of breathing sawdust and silence. "It is the trust's money. And right now the trust does not trust you." Vanessa let out a strangled sob. She had collapsed into her chair, her face buried in her hands. She knew what this meant. She was the one who managed their social calendar, who booked the vacations they couldn't afford, who leased the cars to impress people they didn't like. She knew the math better than Brandon did. She knew they were drowning. Mr. Blackwood adjusted his spectacles and continued reading from the document. Let me clarify the specific powers granted to Mr. Harold Bennett under the terms of the Bennett Family Irrevocable Trust as the sole protector. Mr. Harold Bennett has absolute discretion over all distributions. He decides the amount. He decides the timing. He decides the conditions. The lawyer looked up, locking eyes with Brandon. That means, Mr. Brandon, that if you want to buy a yacht, you do not ask the bank. You ask your father. If you want to pay your mortgage, you ask your father. If you want to buy a sandwich, you ask your father. And if he decides that a yacht is a frivolous expense or that your mortgage is too high for your lifestyle, he can deny the request. He can deny every single request for the rest of your life, and the money will sit in the trust earning interest until you pass away. The color had completely drained from Brandon's face. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw genuine fear. He wasn't just angry. He was terrified. He was looking at the man he had mocked at the funeral, the man he had tried to kick out of this office 10 minutes ago, and he was realizing that I held the keys to his cage. Why? Brandon whispered, sinking into the chair opposite me. Why would she do this to me? She loved me. She did love you, I said. That is exactly why she did this. She watched you turn into a man who values things over people. She watched you ignore your own daughter. She watched you treat your wife like a trophy and your father like a servant. She knew that if she gave you $200 million today, you would be dead or destitute in 5 years. She didn't do this to punish you, son. She did this to save you from yourself. I don't need saving, Brandon roared, finding a spark of his old arrogance. I am a businessman. I have deals in the pipeline. I have investors. You have bookies, Mr. Blackwood corrected him sharply. Let us discuss the liability section of the addendum. Your mother was aware of your gambling activities, Brandon. She hired private investigators. We know about the $5 million you owe to the syndicate in New Jersey. We know they expect payment by close of business today because you told them your inheritance would clear. Vanessa gasped. She lifted her head, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark streaks. 5 million, Brandon, you told me it was 50,000. You told me it was just a bad weekend in Vegas. Brandon ignored her. He was staring at the lawyer, sweat beading on his forehead. You have to pay them, he said, his voice trembling. If I don't pay them today, they aren't going to sue me, Blackwood. They are going to break my legs, or worse. That sounds like a personal problem, I said. I leaned back in the leather chair, crossing my arms over my chest. The trust is established for the benefit of the family, not for the benefit of illegal loan sharks. Paying off a gambling debt seems like a poor use of assets. Brandon looked at me with wild eyes. Dad, please. They will kill me. You can't let that happen. Just sign the check. You have the power. Just sign it and I will do whatever you want. I will let you live in the main house. I will buy you a new truck. Anything. I shook my head slowly. I don't want a new truck, Brandon. And I definitely don't want to live in that mausoleum of a house. You are still trying to negotiate with currency I don't care about. You think you can buy me off just like you tried to buy off your conscience when you visited me once a year for Christmas. I am begging you, he whimpered. It was pathetic. The man in the $5,000 suit was dissolving into a puddle of desperation. Mr. Blackwood, I said, turning to the lawyer, what are the provisions for emergency disbursements? The protector may authorize emergency funds. Blackwood read, only if the beneficiary agrees to a strict rehabilitation plan. This includes, but is not limited to, surrendering all credit cards, liquidating personal luxury assets to cover a portion of the debt, and submitting to weekly drug and gambling addiction counseling. Furthermore, the beneficiary must gain gainful employment approved by the protector. I looked at Brandon. You heard the man. I will authorize the payment to the sharks directly. Not a penny goes into your pocket. In exchange, you hand over your cards, you sell the Porsche, and you get a job. A real job, not consulting or investing. Work. Brandon looked like he had swallowed glass. Sell the Porsche, Get a job, Dad. I am the CEO of Bennett Enterprises. Bennett Enterprises is a shell company that hasn't turned a profit in 6 years, Mr. Blackwood cut in. Your mother subsidized it to keep your ego afloat. That subsidy ends today. The trust will not fund a failing business. This is humiliation, Brandon hissed. You are enjoying this. You are loving this. I am not enjoying this, I said, and I meant it. It broke my heart to see my son this way, so broken, so hollow, that he thought accountability was torture. I am doing the work of a father. Work I should have done when you were 16 instead of letting your mother coddle you. She couldn't say no to you, Brandon. But I can. I stood up and walked over to him. He flinched as if he thought I was going to hit him. I simply placed my hand on the table right next to the $50 bill he had thrown at me. The choice is yours, I said. You can walk out of here with your pride, your $50, and your debt. Or you can surrender. You can admit that you are not the big man you pretend to be. You can let me help you rebuild your life from the ground up. But the free ride is over. The ATM is broken. Brandon looked at the money. He looked at Vanessa, who was nodding frantically, silently, begging him to take the deal. He looked at the window where the city skyline loomed full of people who didn't care if he lived or died. I need time, he croaked. I need to think. You have until noon, I said, checking my old Timex watch. That is when the wire transfer window closes. If you haven't signed the rehabilitation agreement by then, I am going back to my cabin. And you can explain to your friends in New Jersey why the check isn't coming. I turned to the lawyer. I'm going to get some coffee, Mr. Blackwood. I saw a cart in the lobby. Do you want anything, sir? Black, no sugar, the lawyer said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Dad, wait, Brandon called out as I reached the heavy oak door. I stopped my hand on the brass handle. I didn't turn around. What? You can't really control everything, he said, his voice regaining a sliver of its old malice. Mom must have left something directly to me. The house in the Hamptons. The deed is in the family name. Read paragraph 4, I said without looking back. The protector has the right to evict any occupant of trust property who is not contributing to the maintenance and well-being of the estate. You have been living there rent-free for a decade, Brandon. That ends today, too. I suggest you start packing. I walked out into the hallway and let the heavy door click shut behind me, muting the sound of Vanessa's renewed sobbing. I walked down the plush corridor, my boots heavy on the carpet. I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. Catherine had left me a heavy burden, yes. She had left me a war. But she had also left me the weapon to finally fight for my son's soul. I pressed the button for the elevator. When the doors opened, I didn't get in immediately. I stared at my reflection in the polished metal of the interior. I saw an old man in a flannel shirt. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't see a failure. I saw the man who held the purse strings. I saw the protector. And I knew that the real battle was just beginning. Brandon wouldn't give up easily. He would try to trick me. He would try to find a loophole. He was greedy, and greed is the most persistent weed in the garden. But I was a gardener, and I knew how to pull weeds. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like a descent from a different planet. The silence in the brass-paneled box was heavy, broken only by the sharp, erratic tapping of Vanessa's heel against the floor. Brandon wouldn't look at me. He stared at the display numbers, counting down, his jaw clenched so tight I could see a muscle jumping in his cheek. He was a man who had walked in a king and was walking out a beggar, and the reality of it hadn't even fully settled in his stomach yet. When the doors slid open, I didn't wait for them. I walked straight out into the bustling energy of the Manhattan street. The air smelled of exhaust fumes and roasted nuts from a street cart, a scent that felt real and grounding after the sterile, leather-scented air of the law office. I headed straight for the parking garage where they had forced me to hide my truck. I just wanted to go home. Not to the estate, but to my cabin. I wanted to sit on my porch, listen to the wind in the trees, and forget that my son had just tried to sell my dignity for a gambling debt. But I didn't even make it to the crosswalk. Dad, the voice was high-pitched, breathless, and dripping with a sweetness that made my skin crawl. It was Vanessa. She was running in her red-bottomed heels, dodging a bike messenger, waving her hand, as if we were old friends meeting for brunch. I stopped and turned. Brandon was trailing behind her, looking like a sullen teenager who had been dragged to church. Vanessa caught up to me, reaching out to grab my arm. This time she didn't pinch me or try to steer me out of sight. She held my forearm with both hands, her eyes wide and glistening with what I assumed was supposed to be affection. Dad. Please, you can't just run off like that, she panted, offering me a smile that showed all her teeth. We have so much to discuss. We were just so shocked upstairs. You have to understand it was a lot to process. But now that we know, now that we understand Mom's vision, we are so relieved. Truly. It makes so much sense that she would leave the family legacy in your capable hands. I looked down at her hands on my worn flannel sleeve. 10 minutes ago, in that office, she had looked at me like I was a cockroach that had crawled across her dinner plate. Now she was looking at me like I was the sun, and she was a solar panel. It was a masterclass in survival instinct. She realized the power had shifted, and she was shape-shifting to match it. Brandon finally caught up, adjusting his tie, trying to regain some semblance of composure. Yeah, Dad. We were just confused. But look, we need to talk about logistics. You can't go back to that place. He gestured vaguely in the direction of Long Island. What place? I asked, my voice flat. The shack, Brandon said, though he quickly corrected himself when Vanessa elbowed him in the ribs. The cabin. It's not safe, Dad. It's drafty, the roof leaks, and it's miles from the main house. Now that you're the protector, or whatever Blackwood called it, you need to be in the main residence. Vanessa nodded enthusiastically, her earrings catching the sunlight. Exactly. We've already been talking about it on the way down. We can move you into the master suite in the east wing. It has the ocean view, the heated floors, the jacuzzi tub. It's where you belong. We can have the staff move your things. Well, we can buy you all new things. You won't have to lift a finger. We can be a real family again, all under one roof. I watched them perform. It was a grotesque ballet of desperation. They didn't want me in the mansion because they loved me. They wanted me in the mansion because that's where they could work on me. That's where they could isolate me, wear me down, bring me coffee in the morning, and whisper about their needs, their debts, their desires. They wanted to put the warden in the same cell as the prisoners, so they could pick his pockets while he slept. I pulled my arm gently but firmly away from Vanessa's grip. I am not moving into the mansion, I said. Brandon's smile faltered. But why, it's yours. Technically, you control the trust that owns it. Why would you choose to live in a wooden box when you could live in a palace? Because that wooden box is the only thing on that property that is honest, I replied. I built that cabin with my own hands 20 years ago, Brandon. When your mother and I divorced, when I lost the townhouse, the cars, the accounts, that cabin was the only roof I could afford to put over my head. It kept me warm when I had nothing. It didn't judge me when I was broke. I sleep very well there. Brandon let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand through his perfectly gelled hair. Dad, come on. Stop playing the victim. You're rich now. You don't have to act like a martyr anymore. You act like you lost everything in some great tragedy, but we all know you just weren't good with money. You made bad investments. That's why Mom had the fortune and you had the truck. But that's in the past. Stop punishing us for your failures. The air around us seemed to drop 10 degrees. I stared at my son. For 20 years I had held my tongue. For 20 years I had let him believe the narrative that Catherine and I had constructed to protect him. I had let him believe I was incompetent, that I was a bad businessman, that I had squandered my potential. I did it because I wanted him to respect his mother, and I wanted him to have a clean start. But looking at him now, standing in his $5,000 suit, paid for by loans he couldn't service, hearing him call my sacrifice a failure, something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet click of a lock opening. I stepped closer to him. He was taller than me now, but he flinched back as if he expected a blow. My failures. I asked, my voice barely a whisper, but hard as granite. You think I lost my fortune because of bad investments? You think I went from being a top structural engineer in this city to a handyman because I was bad at math? Brandon looked confused. Well, yeah, that's what Mom always said, that you took risks and lost. Mom lied, I said. She lied to protect you, and I let her because I loved you. But I am done protecting you from the truth, Brandon. I pointed a calloused finger at his chest. 20 years ago, you were 25. You were reckless. You were driving that red convertible I bought you for graduation. Do you remember that night in November? The night you came home crying, shaking, saying you hit something on the dark road near the bridge, saying you didn't stop because you were scared. Brandon's face went white. His eyes darted around the street, checking if anyone was listening. Dad, stop. I don't know what you're talking about. I ignored him. It wasn't a deer, Brandon. It was a person. A young man. And you fled the scene. When the police started sniffing around, when the witnesses started coming forward, you were looking at 10 years in prison. Vehicular manslaughter. Leaving the scene. Vanessa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at Brandon with horror. He had never told her. Of course he hadn't. I hired the best lawyers in the state. I continued, my voice trembling with the memory of that terrible year. I paid off the civil suits from the victim's family so they wouldn't press for maximum charges. I paid settlements to keep it quiet, to keep your name out of the papers so you could still have a career. I liquidated everything, my company, my stocks, my retirement. I gave every single cent I had to keep you out of a cage. I took a step back, looking at the man he had become. I destroyed my life to save yours. Catherine kept her money because we put it in her name before the settlements hit to ensure the family had something left. We divorced so my liabilities wouldn't touch her assets. I became a pauper so you could be a prince. And you have the audacity to stand here and tell me I was bad with money. Brandon was trembling. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a ghost. I lived in that cabin because it was all I could afford after buying your freedom, I said. And I will continue to live in that cabin because it reminds me of the price of love. And looking at you now, looking at the man you became, I am starting to wonder if I paid too much. I turned away from them. I didn't wait for an answer. There was no answer. I walked into the parking garage, the darkness swallowing me. I found my old truck, the one with the dented bumper and the fading paint. I climbed in and turned the key. It roared to life, a rough, unpolished sound. As I drove out, I saw them still standing on the sidewalk. Vanessa was staring at Brandon as if she was seeing a stranger. Brandon was staring at the ground. I didn't honk. I didn't wave. I just turned the wheel and pointed the truck toward the highway. I was going back to my cabin. I had a lot of work to do, and for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't doing it to save my son from the world. I was doing it to save him from himself. My cabin smelled of pine sap and old coffee. It was a scent that had comforted me for 20 years, a scent of solitude and honest work. But that morning the air was tainted by the metallic tang of fear. It rolled off my son in waves. Brandon sat across from me at the small oak table I had carved myself during the long winter of '99. He was vibrating. His knee bounced up and down so hard it was shaking the floorboards. He looked like a man who had not slept in 3 days, because he hadn't. He had driven his Ferrari up the dirt track to my door at 6 in the morning, bottoming out on the ruts I usually navigated carefully in my truck. He didn't care about the car anymore. He didn't care about the mud splattering his trousers. He cared about the black sedan that had been parked at the end of the driveway all night. "Sign it, Dad. Just sign the damn thing." He shoved a checkbook toward me. His fingernails were bitten down to the quick, a nervous habit I hadn't seen since he was 12 years old and failed his math final. The check was already filled out. It was made out to a shell corporation I didn't recognize, but I knew exactly where the money would go. $250,000. I looked at the check, then I looked at him. "This is not part of the rehabilitation plan, Brandon," I said calmly. I picked up my mug of black coffee. The steam curled into the cold morning air. "We agreed. You surrender your credit cards. You sell the luxury vehicles. You attend the meetings. Then and only then do we discuss the debts." "We don't have time for meetings," Brandon screamed. He stood up, knocking his chair back. It clattered loudly against the wood stove. "They are not waiting for a rehabilitation plan, Dad. They are waiting for their money." I got a text message this morning. It was a picture of Olivia walking into her preschool. "Do you understand what that means?" "They are watching my daughter." A cold stone dropped into my stomach. Olivia. My granddaughter. The innocent pawn in Brandon's reckless game. I felt a surge of protective rage, but I pushed it down. If I reacted with emotion, Brandon would win. He would learn that using his daughter as a shield worked. I had to be the wall he crashed against, not the cushion that caught him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I had saved the day before. "What are you doing?" Brandon asked, his eyes wide. "Are you calling the police? Don't call the police. They will hurt her if they see cops." "I am not calling the police," I said. "I am calling private security. I am hiring a 24-hour detail for Olivia and Vanessa. The trust will pay for it directly. They will be safe. But I am not paying the extortionists, Brandon. If I pay them $250,000 today, they will want $500,000 tomorrow. You are a cash cow to them. I am drying up the milk." Brandon raked his hands through his hair, pulling at the roots. "You don't get it. You are playing games with my life. Just sign the check. It is a drop in the bucket. The trust has $200 million. This is nothing to you. It is everything to me," I replied. "It is the difference between enabling you and saving you." I looked out the window. A delivery truck was coming up the drive. It wasn't a sleek courier van. It was a beat-up truck from the county animal shelter. I checked my watch. Right on time. Brandon followed my gaze. "Who is that, Whoa?" "What is happening?" I didn't answer him. I stood up and walked to the door. The driver, a woman named Sarah who had been running the shelter on donations and prayers for a decade, hopped out. She looked confused, but hopeful. I had called her yesterday after leaving the lawyer's office. "Mr. Bennett?" she asked, clutching a clipboard. "Good morning, Sarah. Please come in." Brandon stared at us as if we were speaking a foreign language. "Dad, get rid of her. We are in the middle of a crisis." "This is part of the solution," I said. I gestured for Sarah to sit in the chair Brandon had vacated. She looked at Brandon's wild eyes and expensive suit, then at my flannel shirt, and she sat down tentatively. "Sarah, I understand the shelter is facing closure due to a lack of funding for the new kennel wing. Is that correct?" Sarah nodded, her hands twisting her cap. "Yes, sir. We are about 50,000 short. We have dogs sleeping in crates in the hallway. It is not sustainable." I opened the trust's checkbook, the one Brandon had tried to force me to use. I uncapped my pen. It was a cheap ballpoint, but it wrote clearly. "I am writing a check today." I said, my voice loud enough for Brandon to hear every syllable. Brandon froze. He watched the pen touch the paper. He thought I was breaking. He thought I was writing the check for his loan sharks, using Sarah as a cover. A glimmer of hope lit up his desperate face. I wrote the date. I wrote the payee, Stray Souls Animal Rescue. I wrote the amount, $50,000 and 0 cents. I signed my name, Harold Bennett Protector. I tore the check from the book with a crisp, ripping sound. I handed it to Sarah. Here you go. Build the wing. Save the dogs. Sarah looked at the check. Her mouth dropped open. She started to cry. Mr. Bennett, I don't know what to say. This saves us. You have no idea. I stood up and shook her hand. Go deposit it immediately, Sarah, before the bank closes. She hugged me, smelling of wet dog and gratitude, and ran out the door before I could change my mind. I watched her truck rattle away down the path. When I turned back around, Brandon was shaking. He wasn't shaking with fear anymore. He was shaking with a rage so pure and hot, it seemed to distort the air around him. You gave $50,000 to a dog pound, he whispered. His voice was a hiss of steam escaping a boiler. I sat back down. Yes, they needed it, and they will use it for what it was intended for. You gave my money to dogs while your son is being hunted. It is not your money, I repeated. And those dogs never lied to me. Those dogs never forged my signature. Those dogs never abandoned me for 20 years and only came back when they smelled cash. Brandon screamed. It was a primal, ugly sound. He grabbed the heavy oak chair he had been sitting in. It was a chair I had built with hand tools, sanding the grain until it was smooth as silk. I had built it for him actually 20 years ago, hoping he would one day sit in it and talk to me like a son. He lifted the chair over his head and smashed it against the floor. The wood splintered, a leg snapped off and skittered across the room. He didn't stop. He picked it up again and swung it against the wall, putting a dent in the pine logs. He was destroying the only thing I had to offer him all those years ago. My craft, my time. I did not flinch. I did not stand up. I sipped my coffee. Break it all, Brandon, I said softly. Break every stick of furniture in this house. It won't change the balance of the account. It won't put a pen in my hand. He threw the remains of the chair into the fireplace. He was panting, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his nose. He looked at me with hatred. You are enjoying this, he spat. You are a sad, bitter old man who is finally getting his revenge. You want me to die. You want them to kill me so you can keep all the money for yourself. I set my mug down. The ceramic clicked against the table. If I wanted you dead, I would have let the police arrest you 20 years ago when you ran that boy off the road. Brandon flinched as if I had slapped him. If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't have sold my company to pay your settlements. I wouldn't be living in this shack. I would be living in the penthouse and you would be a felon. I have saved your life every single day for 2 decades, Brandon. I am just done paying for the privilege. He stared at me. The rage drained out of him, leaving only the hollow, gnawing fear. He looked at the broken chair in the fireplace. He looked at the checkbook on the table. What do I do? He whispered. Dad, what do I do? You go home, I said. You wait for the security team I hired. You sit in your house with your wife and your daughter, and you look at them. You really look at them. And you ask yourself if the lifestyle you are chasing is worth their safety. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. And the sharks? We'll handle the sharks, I said. But not with a check. Brandon looked confused. How? That is none of your concern. Now get out of my house, and take your trash with you. I pointed to the broken chair leg on the floor. He looked at it. He bent down slowly, his expensive suit straining at the seams, and picked up the piece of wood. He held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the smooth finish I had labored over. He didn't look at me again. He turned and walked out the door, the broken wood in his hand. I watched him get into his Ferrari. He didn't rev the engine this time. He drove away slowly, the car disappearing into the trees. I was left alone in the silence of my cabin. The smell of pine sap was still there, but now it was mixed with the smell of violence and broken trust. I looked at the checkbook. I had made a donation to the dogs, yes, but I had also just declared war. Brandon wouldn't stop here. He was desperate, and desperate men do terrible things. He would be back, and next time he wouldn't just break a chair. I stood up and walked to the wall where I kept my old tools hanging. I took down a heavy iron pry bar. I weighed it in my hand. I wasn't a violent man. I had spent my life building things, not breaking them. But I knew the sharks my son had entangled himself with. I knew they wouldn't just send text messages forever. I needed to secure the perimeter. I needed to check the cameras I had installed weeks ago, the ones Brandon didn't know about. I walked over to the small monitor hidden inside the cupboard. I rewound the footage from 10 minutes ago. There on the screen just before Brandon had arrived. A black sedan rolling slowly past the cabin. A man in the passenger seat snapping a photo. They weren't just watching Brandon. They were watching me. They knew who held the purse strings now. I turned off the monitor. I went to the kitchen and poured the rest of my coffee down the sink. It had gone cold. Let them come. I whispered to the empty room. I have lost everything once before to save my son. I am not afraid to lose it again. But this time nobody gets paid until I get what I want. And what I wanted was my son back. Not the suit, not the CEO, but the boy who used to fish in the pond. I would break him down to his atoms if that is what it took to find him again. I sat back down at the table, picked up the phone, and dialed Mr. Blackwood. "It is done," I said. "He broke the furniture. He is desperate." "Good." Blackwood's voice was dry as dust. "Phase 1 is complete. Shall we initiate Phase 2? "Yes," I said. "Cut his cards, freeze the joint accounts, and send the eviction notice to the mansion." There was a pause on the line. "Are you sure, Harold?" "That is the nuclear option." I looked at the fireplace where the rest of the chair lay in a heap. "I am sure. If he wants to live like a man, he needs to learn what it feels like to have no roof over his head." "Do it." I hung up. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in the logs. A storm was coming, and I was the one summoning the rain. The silence in my cabin did not last long. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that hangs in the air before a tornado touches down. I was sitting in my armchair, cleaning the oil off my hands with a rag, when the door burst open. It wasn't Brandon this time. It was Vanessa. She didn't look like the polished socialite who had sneered at me at the funeral. Her hair was wild, her makeup was smeared, and she was wearing a silk blouse that looked like it cost more than my entire wardrobe. But her eyes were what caught my attention. They were wide, frantic, and filled with a cold, calculating malice. She didn't have a weapon in her hand, but I knew immediately she was here to do violence. "Get out, Vanessa," I said, not bothering to stand up. "I have nothing to say to you." She slammed the door behind her and locked it. She turned to face me, her chest heaving. "You think you have won, don't you, old man? You think because you cut the cards and embarrassed us at the venue that we are just going to roll over and die. You have no idea who you are dealing with." I sighed. I am dealing with a woman who married a wallet, not a man. And now that the wallet is empty, she is panicking. Go home to your husband. He needs you. Or at least he needs someone to blame. Vanessa laughed. It was a shrill, ugly sound. "Brandon is a useless idiot. He is crying in the bathroom right now. He is weak." But I am not weak. I did not spend 10 years playing the perfect wife to let a senile gardener take everything from me. She began to pace around the room, picking things up and throwing them down. A book. A coaster. My reading glasses. I know the law, Harold, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I know that if a senior citizen is deemed a danger to themselves or others, the state can intervene. Emergency guardianship, immediate institutionalization. And you know what helps that process? A violent outburst, an assault. I watched her, my muscles tensing. What are you talking about? She walked over to the heavy iron poker hanging by the fireplace. She weighed it in her hand. Then she looked me dead in the eye and smiled. She screamed. It was a blood-curdling shriek loud enough to wake the dead. Help, stop, please don't hurt me. Then she did the unthinkable. She swung the iron poker not at me, but at the glass cabinet where I kept my few family photos. The glass shattered, raining shards onto the floor. She screamed again. He has a weapon. Help, Vanessa, stop this, I shouted, standing up. She ignored me. She dropped the poker and ran toward the wall, slamming her own shoulder hard against the rough pine logs. She cried out in pain, real pain this time. Then she clawed her fingernails down her own face, leaving angry red welts across her cheek. She ripped the collar of her silk blouse, exposing her shoulder. It was a performance of pure insanity. She was destroying herself to destroy me. She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed 3 numbers. 911. Yes. Please send help, she sobbed into the receiver, sliding down the wall to the floor, curling into a ball amidst the broken glass. My father-in-law is attacking me. He has gone crazy. He locked me in here. He is hitting me. Please hurry. She hung up and looked at me. The tears stopped instantly. A cold smirk replaced the mask of terror. The police are 5 minutes away, Harold. When they get here, they will see a battered woman and a confused, angry old man. They know about Brandon's petition for your mental incompetence. This will be the final nail. You are going to a secure facility tonight, and by morning I will have power of attorney. I stood there looking at the woman curled on my floor. I felt a wave of nausea. This was the mother of my grandchild. This was the person my son had chosen. It was vile. I sat back down in my chair. I did not try to run. I did not try to argue. I just waited. Vanessa watched me, confused by my lack of panic. Why aren't you fighting? Why aren't you begging? It doesn't matter. It's too late. You're finished. 4 minutes later, blue and red lights flashed through the window, painting the cabin walls in a chaotic rhythm. Sirens wailed, cutting through the quiet of the woods. I heard car doors slam, heavy boots running on the porch. Police, open up. Vanessa started screaming again. He's in here. Help me. The door was kicked in. 2 officers burst into the room, guns drawn. They saw the scene exactly as Vanessa had staged it. The broken glass, the overturned furniture, the woman on the floor bleeding from her face, her clothes torn, sobbing hysterically, and the old man sitting in the corner looking stoic. Hands. Show me your hands. The officer screamed at me. I raised my hands slowly, keeping them open and visible. I am unarmed, officer. I am sitting down. The second officer rushed to Vanessa. Ma'am, are you okay? She clung to him, weeping. He went crazy. He just snapped. He started throwing things. He hit me. He wouldn't let me leave. Look at what he did to me. The officer looked at her scratches and the bruise forming on her shoulder. He looked at me with disgust. Get on the ground. Now I moved slowly. My knees ached as I lowered myself to the floorboards. I felt the cold steel of handcuffs snap around my wrists. They were tight. You have the right to remain silent, the officer recited, hauling me up. I know my rights, I said calmly. You sick old man, the officer spat. Beating on a woman, you belong in a cage. Vanessa was being led out by the other officer. She looked back at me over her shoulder. Her eyes were triumphant. She mouthed the words, Goodbye, Harold. Officer, I said, my voice steady despite the pain in my shoulders. Before you take me away, I would like to make a statement. Tell it to the judge, the officer said, shoving me toward the door. It pertains to the evidence at the scene. I continued digging my heels in. If you take me away without collecting it, you will be liable for a false arrest lawsuit that will cost this department millions. The officer stopped. He looked at me. He saw that I wasn't drunk. I wasn't raving. I was completely lucid. What evidence? There is glass everywhere. We see the evidence. I nodded toward the ceiling directly above the fireplace. There, nestled between two wooden beams, was a small black circle. It was almost invisible in the shadows, but the tiny red light blinked once, a steady heartbeat in the chaos. I installed a cloud-based security system 2 weeks ago, I said. Audio and video, high definition. It covers the entire main room. Vanessa froze in the doorway. The color drained from her face so fast, she looked like a corpse. What? She whispered. I looked at the officer holding my arm. If you check the cloud server, which I can access from my phone in my pocket, you will see this woman enter my home uninvited. You will see her threaten me. You will see her smash my property. You will see her throw herself against the wall and scratch her own face. And you will see me sitting in that chair, not lifting a finger. The room went deadly silent. The only sound was the crackle of the police radio. Check it, the first officer said to his partner. He didn't let go of me, but his grip loosened slightly. The second officer reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I gave him the passcode. He tapped the screen. A moment later, the tiny, tinny sound of Vanessa's voice filled the room. I know the law, Harold. Emergency guardianship. Take away your money. The video played on. The officer watched it, his face twisting in disbelief. He watched Vanessa pick up the poker. He watched her scream for help when no one was touching her. He watched her mutilate herself. He looked up from the phone. He looked at Vanessa. His expression had changed from sympathy to cold fury. He showed the screen to his partner. The partner watched for 10 seconds. Then he uncuffed me. I rubbed my wrists. Thank you, officer. The partner walked over to Vanessa. She was backing away, shaking her head. No, that's deepfake. That's AI. He made it. Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back, the officer said, his voice hard. No, you don't understand. He tricked me. He knew the camera was there. You are under arrest for filing a false police report, criminal mischief, and attempted fraud, the officer stated, spinning her around and clamping the cuffs on her wrists, the same cuffs that had been on me 10 seconds ago. Vanessa started screaming, but it wasn't a fake scream this time. It was the scream of a predator who had just walked into a bear trap. Brandon Call. Brandon. He will sue you. He will sue all of you. They dragged her out the door. I watched from the window as they shoved her into the back of the cruiser. The red and blue lights illuminated her face, twisted in ugly, raw hatred. The first officer stayed behind to take my statement. He looked shaken. Mr. Bennett, I apologize. In 20 years on the force, I have never seen anything like that. She really wanted to put you away. She wanted my life, officer, I said, looking at the shattered glass on the floor. She wanted to erase me so she could spend my money. I showed him the rest of the footage. I pointed out the specific threats. I made sure he noted every detail in his report. I wanted it watertight. When they finally left, taking the chaos with them, the cabin felt very empty. I was alone again. My wrist throbbed. My photos were destroyed. The sanctuary I had built was violated, but I was still standing. I swept up the glass. I put the furniture back. And then I sat down at my table and opened my notebook. I turned to a fresh page. Phase 2 was complete. They had tried violence. They had tried the law. And they had failed. Now they were exposed. There was no going back for them. Vanessa would have a criminal record. Brandon's wife was a felon. The scandal would be absolute. But I wasn't done. I knew my son. He wouldn't stop. He would blame Vanessa. He would say he didn't know. He would try to distance himself from the wreckage. He would come crawling back, claiming he was a victim too. I needed to make sure he had nowhere to crawl to. I picked up my phone. It was late, but I knew who would be awake. I dialed the number of the private investigator I had hired weeks ago, the one who had helped me install the cameras. "It's Hal," I said. "Mr. Bennett, is everything okay? I saw the alert on the system. Everything is fine. Vanessa is in custody. But we need to move to the next target." "Who, my granddaughter?" I said. "Not to hurt her, to save her." I had been keeping tabs on Maya for a month. Brandon's secret daughter. The one he abandoned when she was an infant, because she didn't fit his image. The one he paid hush money to keep quiet, money he stole from the family accounts years ago. She was working double shifts at a diner in Queens, trying to put herself through community college. She didn't know I existed. She didn't know she was the heir to an empire. "It is time to bring her in," I told the investigator. "Brandon thinks he is the only Bennett left. He thinks I have no choice but to leave it to him eventually. He is about to find out that the family tree has a branch he tried to cut off." I hung up the phone. I looked at the spot on the wall where Vanessa had thrown herself. They wanted a war. They wanted to play dirty. They didn't realize that when you fight a man who has nothing left to lose, you are fighting a man who has everything to gain. I wasn't just fighting for my money anymore. I was fighting for my legacy. And tomorrow I was going to meet the future of the Bennett family. And her name wasn't Brandon. The diner was located in a part of Queens where the subway rumbling overhead shook the dust off the awnings. It was a place that smelled of stale frying oil and despair. I sat in a booth in the back nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like battery acid. My wrist still ached from the handcuffs, a dull throb that reminded me of the war I was fighting. But looking across the room, I realized my war was a luxury compared to the battle the girl behind the counter was fighting every single day. Her name was Maya. She was 20 years old. She had dark hair pulled back in a messy bun and eyes that were so familiar it hurt to look at them. They were Catherine's eyes, my ex-wife's eyes. They had the same spark of intelligence, the same depth, but in Maya that spark was being smothered by exhaustion. She was wearing a uniform that was 2 sizes too big, stained with ketchup and grease. She was moving between the tables with a speed that spoke of desperation, balancing 3 plates on one arm while pouring coffee with the other. I had found her through the private investigator's file. Brandon, my son, had fathered her during a brief affair 2 decades ago. He had paid the mother a lump sum from the family accounts, money he stole from me, to disappear. He had signed away his rights. He had erased her. He thought that by throwing money at the problem, it would vanish. But problems don't vanish. They grow up. They get jobs. They struggle to pay for community college while their father buys yachts he can't afford. I watched her work. A customer, a heavy-set man in a suit that was too tight, snapped his fingers at her. "Hey, sweetheart, my eggs are cold. Take them back." I saw Maya flinch. I saw her hands tighten into fists for a fraction of a second before she forced a smile onto her face. "I am so sorry, sir. I will have the cook make a fresh batch right away." She reached for the plate, but the man grabbed her wrist. "And tell him to hurry up. I have a meeting. I don't have time for incompetence." I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost blinded me. It was the same rage I had felt toward Brandon, but purified. This girl was working for pennies, while my son had burned millions. I started to rise from my seat, but I stopped. I needed to see how she handled it. I needed to know if she had the steel. Maya pulled her wrist away gently, but firmly. "Please do not touch me, sir. I will get your eggs." She walked away, her back straight. She didn't cry. She didn't crumble. She had dignity. She had more dignity in her stained apron than Vanessa had in her silk blouses. She went to the pass-through window and spoke to the cook. Then she turned and saw the manager. He was a short, balding man named Gino, with a face that looked like it was permanently smelling something bad. He was standing by the register counting cash and watching the interaction with the customer. He waved Maya over. I couldn't hear what he said at first, but his body language was aggressive. He pointed at the customer, then jabbed a finger into Maya's shoulder. I focused, straining to hear over the clatter of silverware. You are losing me money, Maya. That is the second send-back today. That comes out of your tips. But Gino the food sat in the window for 10 minutes because you wouldn't run it. Maya said, her voice low but steady. It wasn't my fault. I don't pay you to make excuses. I pay you to look pretty and serve the food. If you can't do that, there are 10 other girls waiting for this job. Now get back to work or get out. Maya looked at him. She swallowed her pride. I saw the calculation in her eyes. She was thinking about rent. She was thinking about tuition. She was thinking about groceries. She nodded and turned back to the floor. She came to my table to refill my coffee. Her hand was shaking slightly. Rough morning, I said softly. She looked at me, startled, as if she hadn't expected the old man in the flannel shirt to speak. Just the usual lunch rush, sir. Can I get you anything else? I looked at her name tag. It was crooked. You are studying, aren't you, Maya? She paused, the pot of coffee hovering over my mug. How did you know I pointed to the textbook sticking out of her bag behind the counter? Introduction to Business Management. That is a heavy book for a light read. She smiled, a genuine tired smile that transformed her face. Yeah, I have a midterm on Thursday. Trying to squeeze in some reading between shifts. Good for you, I said. What do you want to do with it? She sighed, looking out the window at the gray Queens Street. I want to open my own place one day. Not like this, a real place. Somewhere people actually want to be. Sustainable food. Fair wages. I want to prove that you can run a business without... She stopped herself, glancing at Gino. Without treating people like dirt, I finished for her. She laughed. Yeah, something like that. But that is a long way off. Right now, I just need to make rent. She moved on to the next table. I watched her go. I took a sip of the terrible coffee. It tasted better now. It tasted like potential. I had found her. I had found the one person in this family who understood the value of $1 because she had to bleed for it. I took out my phone. I dialed Mr. Blackwood. Harold, is everything okay? Is it Vanessa? Vanessa is handled, I said. I am in Queens, at a diner called Sal's on 35th Avenue. Who owns the building? There was a pause, the sound of typing. It looks like a holding company. They are leveraged pretty high. Why buy it? I said. Harold, excuse me, buy the building. Buy the lease, buy the debt. I don't care how you structure it. I want to own this diner in 10 minutes. Offer them 20% over market value for an immediate cash close. Use the emergency acquisition fund in the trust. Harold, that is a significant layout for a greasy spoon in Queens. It is not a greasy spoon, I said, watching Maya wipe down a table while Gino yelled at her from across the room. It is a training ground. Just do it, Blackwood. Call the owner. Tell him he has 5 minutes to accept or I walk. I hung up. I waited. 10 minutes passed. I watched Gino berate Maya again, this time for dropping a fork. He got right in her face, his spittle flying. He was enjoying it. He was a small man with a little bit of power, and he was using it to crush someone he knew couldn't fight back. It was the same dynamic Brandon used. It was the same dynamic Vanessa used. It was a disease. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Blackwood. Done. The owner accepted. The digital transfer is initiating. You are the landlord. And you own the operating license. I stood up. My knees cracked, but I felt strong. I walked to the register. Gino was there counting a stack of ones. "Check, please," I said. Gino didn't look up. "$7.50. I pulled out $100 bill. "Keep the change." Gino looked up then. His greedy eyes widened. He snatched the bill. "Thanks, Pops." I didn't move. "Actually, there is one more thing. I want to speak to Maya." Gino scowled. "She's working. She don't have time to chat with customers." "Call her over," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had the timbre of authority I hadn't used since I ran construction sites in the 80s. Gino blinked, surprised by the tone. He turned and yelled, "Maya, front." Maya came running, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, Gino, did I do something wrong?" "No," I said, turning to her. "You didn't do anything wrong." "But Gino did." Gino laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Excuse me, who do you think you are, Santa Claus? Get out of my diner before I call the cops." "It is not your diner," I said. "Not anymore." I pulled my phone out and showed him the email Blackwood had just forwarded. It was the deed transfer confirmation. It was legal. It was binding. "Your boss just sold the place," I said. "To me, including the operating license. Which means I am the new owner." Gino stared at the phone. He snatched it from my hand, scrolling through the document. His face turned red, then purple. This is fake. "You can't just buy a restaurant over lunch." "I can," I said, taking my phone back. And I did. "And as the new owner, I am making some staffing changes. You are fired." The diner went silent. The customer with the cold eggs stopped chewing. Maya covered her mouth with her hand. "You can't fire me," Gino sputtered. "I run this place. Without me, this dump collapses. I think we will manage," I said. "Get your things. Leave the cash in the register. If you are not out the door in 2 minutes, I will have you removed for trespassing. And considering I just saw you skimming from the tip jar, I might press charges for theft too." Gino looked at me. He looked at Maya. He looked at the register. He realized he was outmatched. He muttered a curse, grabbed his jacket, and stormed out the doors, kicking a chair on his way. The silence stretched out. Every eye in the room was on me. I turned to Maya. She was trembling. "Sir, what just happened?" I smiled at her. It felt rusty but genuine. "I just made a business investment. But I have a problem. I live out in the Hamptons. I can't run a diner in Queens. I need a manager. Someone who knows the business. Someone who cares about the quality." Maya stared at me. You want me to manage it?" I looked around the room. "I don't see anyone else qualified. The pay is double what you were making, plus full tuition reimbursement for your business degree. But I have conditions." "Conditions?" she asked, her voice wary. She was smart. She knew nothing came for free. "Yes, the food has to be fresh. The staff gets treated with respect. And you have to sit down and have a slice of pie with me right now. I need to know who I am hiring." Maya looked at the door where Gino had exited. She looked at the apron she was wearing. Then she looked at me. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." We sat in the booth. I ordered the cherry pie. It was stale, but it tasted like victory. We talked for 2 hours. I didn't tell her I was her grandfather. Not yet. That was a burden she wasn't ready for. I told her I was an investor looking for potential. I told her I saw something in her that reminded me of someone I used to know. She told me about her life. She told me about growing up with a single mom who worked 3 jobs. She told me about the father she never knew, the man who sent a check for a few years and then vanished. She told me she didn't hate him because she didn't have the energy to hate a ghost. She just wanted to be better than him. She wanted to build something that lasted. Listening to her, I felt a pang of guilt so sharp it almost doubled me over. I had let this happen. I had let Brandon abandon her. I had been so focused on fixing my son that I had ignored the collateral damage he left behind. But looking at her, I also felt hope. Brandon was broken. He was wrought all the way through. But this girl, she was the steel I had been looking for. She was the foundation. When I finally got up to leave, the sun was setting. The diner was clean. The staff was smiling for the first time in years. Maya walked me to the door. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett," she said. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," I said. "Here is my number. If you need anything, supplies, repairs, help with tuition, you call me directly. You don't go through a bank. You call me." She took the card. She looked at it, then she did something that nearly broke me. She hugged me. It was a quick, awkward hug, smelling of diner coffee and gratitude. "My father never came back for me," she whispered. "But today, it feels like someone finally showed up." I patted her back, my hand trembling. "I am here now, Maya. I am not going anywhere." I walked to my truck. I sat in the cab for a long time before I started the engine. I watched her through the window as she started giving orders to the cook, her face serious and focused. She was a natural leader. She was a Bennett in the way the name used to mean something, before the money poisoned it. I drove back to Long Island in the dark. I was exhausted. My body ached. But my mind was clear. I had secured the future. Now I had to finish dealing with the pet. Brandon would be waiting. Vanessa would be in a cell calling him, screaming for bail money he didn't have. The pressure was building. He would be desperate. He would try something stupid. Let him try, I thought, gripping the steering wheel. I have an army now. I have a lawyer who is a shark. I have a granddaughter who is a lion. And I have a $50 bill in my pocket that reminds me exactly what my son thinks I am worth. He was about to find out that the inflation rate on disrespect is very, very high. I sat in the darkness of my cabin, the only light coming from the bank of monitors I had installed inside the false wall of my pantry. The air smelled of stale coffee and ozone. My eyes were burning, but I could not look away. I was watching a tragedy unfold in high definition. On the screen, the library of the main mansion was bathed in shadow. My son Brandon was pacing back and forth, a glass of scotch in his hand. He looked like a man who had been hunted for sport. His tie was undone, his hair was a mess, and he was talking to a man sitting in my old leather armchair. I knew the man. His name was Finch. He was a private investigator who specialized in digging up dirt for divorce settlements and corporate blackmail. He was expensive, he was thorough, and he had no morals. Brandon had hired him 12 hours ago, using the last of the cash he had hidden in his wall safe. I knew this because I tracked the withdrawal. I turned up the volume on the receiver. Brandon's voice came through tinny but clear. "Tell me you found something, Finch. Tell me the old man has a secret bank account in the Caymans. Tell me he stole from the company in the 80s. I need leverage. I need something to force him to sign the release papers. If I don't get that money by tomorrow, I am a dead man." Finch took a slow sip of his drink. He didn't look worried. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, yellowed file folder. He tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "I found everything, kid. But you are not going to use it to blackmail him. Because if this gets out, you are the one who is going to look like a fool." Brandon stopped pacing. He looked at the file. "What are you talking about?" "Is he a criminal?" Finch laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. "No. He is a ghost. And you are the reason he died." I watched Brandon kneel by the table. His hands were shaking as he opened the folder. I knew what was in there. I recognized the documents even from the grainy video feed. They were the original incorporation papers for Bennett Global. The real ones. Not the sanitized versions we released to the press in '95. Finch leaned forward. You paid me to find out where Harold Bennett's money went. You wanted to know why he ended up a gardener while your mother ended up a queen. You thought he was incompetent. You thought he gambled it away or drank it away. Brandon was flipping through the pages. I don't understand. These are incorporation documents. It says Harold Bennett was the sole proprietor. But Mom always said she started the company with her inheritance. Your mom was a receptionist, Brandon, Finch said brutally. A damn good one, but she didn't have 2 nickels to rub together when they met. Harold built that company from the ground up. He designed the patents. He negotiated the contracts. He made the first 10 million before you were even born. Then why? Brandon stammered. Why did she have everything? Why did he live in a shack? Finch pointed a thick finger at a document near the bottom of the stack. Look at the date on the transfer of assets. November 14th, 2003. Does that date ring a bell? I saw Brandon freeze. I saw the blood drain from his face on the monitor. November 14th. The night of the accident. The night he ran a young father off the road and came home crying to me, begging me to fix it. Finch continued, his voice relentless. 2 days after your little hit and run, your father transferred 100% of his assets to your mother. The house, the stocks, the company, the patents, everything. He signed it all over for $1. Why? Brandon whispered. Because of liability, you idiot, Finch said. If the family of the victim had sued him while he had those assets, they would have taken everything. They would have pierced the corporate veil. Your dad knew that to save the empire, he had to own nothing. He had to be judgment-proof. Brandon was reading frantically now. But the divorce. They hated each other. They fought all the time. Theater, Finch said. Pure theater. I dug into the phone records. I dug into the security logs. Your father and mother spoke on the phone every night at 9 p.m. for 20 years. Every single night. I found photos of her sneaking down to that cabin 3 times a week. They never separated, Brandon. They staged a divorce to create a legal firewall between his past liabilities and her future assets. They did it to protect the money, and they did it to protect you. I closed my eyes in the cabin. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. We had been so careful. We had sacrificed our public image, our marriage certificate, our very identities, to build a fortress around our son. We thought if we saved him from the consequences of his actions, he would grow up grateful. We thought he would use his second chance to be a good man. On the screen, Brandon dropped the papers. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. He isn't a failure, Brandon whispered. He is the architect. He built it all, and he gave it all up. For me, for a moment, just a fleeting heartbeat, I saw a flicker of realization on my son's face. I saw the potential for redemption. I saw him understanding the weight of the love he had been given. I held my breath. I hoped. But then the expression changed. The shock melted away, replaced by something ugly and dark. His eyes narrowed. His lip curled. The gratitude I hoped for didn't come. Instead, a wave of pure, hot victimhood washed over him. They lied to me, Brandon hissed. He stood up, kicking the table. They played me for 20 years. They let me believe he was a loser. They let me treat him like garbage. He wasn't angry that we saved him. He was angry that we hadn't told him. He was angry that he had been left out of the con. He made me look stupid, Brandon screamed at the investigator. He sat there in his flannel shirt, letting me mock him, letting me laugh at him, all while he knew he owned the very chair I was sitting in. He was laughing at me, he was getting off on it. No, son. I whispered to the screen. I was weeping for you. Finch looked unimpressed. He saved your life, kid. If he hadn't done that transfer, you would be in prison and there would be no inheritance to fight over. I don't care, Brandon roared. He humiliated me. He watched me struggle. He watched me try to build businesses and fail knowing all along he had the answers. He manipulated me. He is not a saint. He is a monster. He likes the control. That is why he has the trust now. It is not about teaching me a lesson. It is about power. He wants me on my knees. He walked over to the fireplace in the mansion, the twin to the one in my cabin, and grabbed a bottle of vodka. He smashed the neck against the mantel and took a long swig from the jagged glass. Well, I am not going to kneel. Brandon spat, wiping his mouth. If he thinks he can shame me with his $50 and his secret sacrifice, he is wrong. I don't owe him anything. He owes me. He owes me for the 20 years of lies. He turned to Finch, his eyes wild and bloodshot. Give me the file. Finch hesitated. What are you going to do with it? Brandon snatched the folder. I am going to use it. You said the transfer was to avoid liability. That sounds like fraud to me. Bankruptcy fraud. Asset concealment. If I show this to the IRS, if I show this to the SEC, the whole empire comes crashing down. Finch stood up, closing his briefcase. You do that, and the money disappears. Brandon, you burn the house down with you inside it. I don't care. Brandon said, a terrifying calmness settling over him. If I can't have the money, neither can he. I will burn it all down. I will send him to jail for fraud. I will expose the whole charade. I will tell the world that Harold Bennett is a liar and a cheat, and then I will watch him rot in a cell just like he wanted me to. Finch shook his head. You are a piece of work, Bennett. That will be $5,000. Brandon threw a wad of cash at him. Get out. Finch left. I watched my son standing alone in the library of the house I built. He held the file that proved how much I loved him, and he looked at it like it was a weapon. He wasn't thinking about the sacrifice. He wasn't thinking about his mother. He was thinking about how to hurt me. His disillusionment hadn't humbled him. It had radicalized him. He couldn't accept that he was the villain of his own story, so he had rewritten the script. In his mind, he was the victim of a 20-year conspiracy. His hatred was a shield protecting his fragile ego. I reached out and turned off the monitor. The screen went black, but the image of his hate-filled face burned in my mind. I sat in the darkness for a long time. My heart felt like a piece of lead in my chest. I had held on to hope for so long. I had held on to the idea that somewhere deep down, there was a good man inside my son. A man who just needed the right push. But the man on that screen was not good. He was a cancer. And you cannot negotiate with cancer. You have to cut it out. I picked up my phone. I dialed Mr. Blackwood. It was 3 a.m, but he answered on the first ring. Harold. He knows, I said. My voice was steady, cold. He hired a PI. He found the incorporation papers. He knows about the asset transfer in 2003. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. That is problematic. Does he understand why he understands? But he doesn't care. He plans to use it to allege fraud. He wants to report the transfer as an illegal concealment of assets to avoid civil liability. He wants to burn the trust down. Blackwood was silent for a moment. The statute of limitations on the civil suits has passed, Harold. But the reputational damage, the IRS investigation, it would be messy. It would freeze the assets for years. He is bluffing. He needs the money too bad. He is not bluffing, I said. He is past logic. He is operating on pure spite. He is going to hold a press conference. He is organizing a gala tomorrow night, a fundraiser for his shell company. He plans to corner me there. He thinks if he threatens to expose the fraud in front of the cameras, I will sign the check to keep his secret. So what do we do? Blackwood asked. Do we settle? Do we give him a stipend? No, I said. We finish it. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the dark woods surrounding my cabin. He wants to talk about the past. He wants to bring up the accident. Fine. We will talk about the accident. But we will tell the whole story, not the version he remembers. What do you mean? Blackwood asked nervously. I mean, it is time to open the safe deposit box, the one Catherine told you to never open unless Brandon tried to destroy the family. Harold, that box contains the dashcam footage. It contains the police report we buried. It contains his confession tape. If you release that, he goes to prison. Not for fraud, for manslaughter. I know, I said. He is your son. He was my son, I replied. Now he is just a man who is trying to blackmail his father with the evidence of his own salvation. Prepare the files, Blackwood, and get the projector ready for the gala. If he wants a show, we will give him a show. I hung up the phone. I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt resolved. The time for gardening was over. It was time for the harvest. And the crop was bitter. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was suffocating under the weight of 1,000 white roses and the scent of expensive perfume. It was a gala for the Future Horizons Initiative, a charity that existed only on paper, created by my son to launder his reputation and attract new investors for his failing schemes. The room was filled with the city elite politicians, hedge fund managers, and socialites, all drinking champagne that cost more than my monthly food budget. They were there because they thought the Bennett money was flowing again. They thought the tap had been turned back on. I stood in the shadows near the kitchen entrance wearing my 30-year-old tuxedo. It smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs, and the lapels were too wide for current fashion, but it was clean. I watched my son work the room. Brandon was in his element. He was charming, laughing, touching elbows, and flashing that $1,000,000 smile that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life. Beside him, Vanessa looked pale and brittle. Her makeup applied heavily to cover the stress lines, but she played her part, nodding and laughing on cue. They were celebrating a victory they hadn't won yet. They were spending money they didn't have. The rental of this ballroom alone was $50,000. I knew because I had seen the invoice hit the trust's alert system that morning. I hadn't blocked it. I let it go through. I wanted them all here. I wanted the stage set. Brandon spotted me. His smile didn't falter for a second, but his eyes went cold. He excused himself from a conversation with a senator and made a beeline for me, weaving through the crowd with the grace of a shark. He hooked his arm through mine, pulling me out of the shadows and into the light of the chandeliers. "Dad," he said, his voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "I am so glad you could make it. You look vintage." He steered me toward the center of the room, his grip on my bicep painful. He was parading me. He was showing the world that the eccentric protector of the trust was on board, that the family was united. "Keep walking," he hissed in my ear, his voice dropping to a frequency only I could hear. "Don't make a scene. We are going to walk to the stage. You are going to take the microphone. And you are going to announce that due to my exceptional leadership, you are stepping down as protector and handing full control of the trust to me, effective immediately." I looked at him. He was sweating. Tiny beads of perspiration were gathering on his upper lip, despite the air conditioning. "And if I don't?" I asked calmly. Brandon stopped. We were in the middle of the dance floor. People were watching us, smiling, thinking they were seeing a tender moment between father and son. "If you don't," Brandon whispered, leaning in close as if to fix my bow tie, "I will destroy you." I have the file, Dad. I know about the asset transfer in 2003. I know you moved everything to Mom's name to hide it. I stared at him. I told you why I did that. I did it to save you. It doesn't matter why you did it, Brandon sneered. It matters what it looks like. And to the press, it looks like bankruptcy fraud. It looks like you hid assets to cheat creditors. I have a reporter from the Times standing right over there by the bar. If you don't announce the transfer in 5 minutes, I am going to give him the file. I will tell him that Harold Bennett is a crook who built this empire on lies. You will go to prison, Dad. Real federal prison, and the Bennett name will be mud. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He was threatening to destroy the legacy I built, the legacy I saved for him, just to get his hands on cash he would burn in a week. He was willing to send his own father to jail for a crime that was actually an act of sacrificial love. You would burn down the house with yourself inside it, I asked softly. I have a parachute, Brandon said, his eyes manic. I will sell the story rights. I will survive. But you are an old man. You will die in a cell. He squeezed my arm harder. Sign the papers, Dad. Make the announcement. Be the hero one last time, or be the villain. It is your choice. He pulled back, slapping me on the shoulder jovially for the benefit of the watching crowd. I looked around the room. I saw the faces of people who judged value by the cut of a suit. I saw Vanessa watching us with terrified, hungry eyes. I saw Maya, my granddaughter, standing by the service entrance where I had told her to wait. She looked out of place in her simple dress, but she stood tall, her eyes fixed on me with worry. I looked back at my son. I saw the boy I had taught to ride a bike. I saw the teenager I had bailed out of jail. I saw the man who had just threatened to bury me. Okay, I said. Brandon let out a breath he had been holding. Good. Good choice. He signaled to the band. The music stopped. A spotlight hit the stage. Brandon led me up the stairs. He walked with a bounce in his step, the swagger of a man who thinks he has just pulled off the bluff of the century. He stepped up to the podium and tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Brandon boomed, his charisma turned up to max volume. Tonight is a night of new beginnings, a night of legacy. And to kick things off, my father, Harold Bennett, has a very special announcement to make regarding the future of the Bennett family. He stepped aside, gesturing for me to take the spot. He was smirking. He thought he had won. He thought fear was the only currency that mattered. I walked to the podium. The light blinded me for a moment. I gripped the sides of the wooden stand. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the reporter Brandon had pointed out, notebook in hand. I saw the investors waiting to hear that their money was safe. And then I saw Brandon standing just to my right, slightly behind me. He gave me a subtle nod, his eyes hard and threatening. Do it, his eyes said. Give me what is mine. I reached into my pocket. I didn't pull out the prepared speech Brandon had tucked there earlier. I pulled out a small silver thumb drive. I looked at the audiovisual technician at the side of the stage. I held up the drive. I had paid him $500 an hour ago to play whatever was on this drive when I gave the signal. I placed the drive on the podium. Then I leaned into the microphone. My voice boomed through the hall, raspy and tired, but louder than it had been in 20 years. My son wants me to talk about the past, I said. He wants me to talk about secrets. He threatened to expose the truth about our family if I didn't give him what he wanted tonight. A murmur went through the crowd. Brandon's smile faltered. He took a half step forward, confused. So I continued. I think we should give him what he wants. I think we should tell the truth. All of it. I looked at Brandon. His face had gone white. He realized in that split second that he had brought a knife to a gunfight. He realized that a man who is willing to lose everything is the most dangerous man in the world. I signaled the technician. "Hit it," I said. The giant screen behind me, which had been displaying the logo of Brandon's fake charity, flickered. The room went dark, and then the video began to play. The giant screen flickered, then illuminated the dark ballroom with a grainy, high-definition image. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It wasn't a bank statement. It was the interior of my cabin, the rough pine logs, unmistakable even in black and white. The timestamp in the corner read 2 weeks ago. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Vanessa appeared on the screen. They saw her pacing like a caged animal. They watched her pick up the heavy iron poker, weighing it in her hand with chilling calculation. Then they watched her scream. It was a silent movie to them, but the horror was visceral. They saw her throw herself against the wall, clawing at her own face, ripping her blouse, creating the bruises she had later claimed I inflicted. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was the sound of 100 socialites realizing they were standing next to a sociopath. Vanessa let out a strangled cry, her hands flying to her mouth. She lunged toward the technician booth, tripping over the train of her gown, but it was too late. The image was burned into every retina in the room. That is out of context," Brandon shouted, his voice cracking high and desperate. "That is a deepfake. He doctored it. My father is a tech wizard. He made it up." "Keep watching," I said into the microphone, my voice calm against his hysteria. The video cut to black. Then an audio waveform appeared on the screen, and a voice filled the ballroom. It was crystal clear. It was unmistakable. It was Brandon. "Just die already, you stingy old hag." Brandon's voice sneered, echoing off the gilded ceiling. The timestamp showed it was recorded 3 days before Catherine died in her hospital room. "Stop holding on. We need the money. Just let go so I can finally live my life. You are useless to me like this." The silence that followed was heavier than the grave. It was a physical weight pressing down on everyone. I looked out at the crowd. I saw faces twisted in disgust. I saw the reporter from the Times typing furiously on his phone, his eyes wide. I saw the investors, the men Brandon had been charming just minutes ago, recoiling, as if he were radioactive. Brandon stood frozen on the stage. He looked like a man who had been stripped naked in a blizzard. There was no charm left, no swagger, just the ugly naked rot of his soul exposed for the world to see. I leaned into the microphone. "You wanted to talk about fraud. Brandon. You wanted to talk about character. You wanted to threaten me with the past. Let's talk about the present. Let's talk about the terms of the trust." I pulled a folded piece of paper from my tuxedo pocket. It was the addendum Mr. Blackwood had read in his office, the one Brandon had dismissed in his arrogance. "Clause 4, Section B." I read aloud, my voice steady and booming. "If any primary beneficiary is found to have engaged in criminal activity against the protector, or is found to have engaged in acts of moral turpitude that bring disgrace upon the family name, the protector has the unilateral right to invoke the disinheritance protocol." I looked at my son. He was shaking his hands, opening and closing uselessly at his sides. You can't do that. Mom wouldn't." "I just did." I cut him off. "The video of your wife filing a false police report. That is a felony. The recording of you abusing your dying mother. That is moral turpitude. You triggered the clause, Brandon. You pulled the trigger on yourself. You thought you were untouchable because you were her son. You forgot that being a son is a title you have to earn." I gestured to the side of the stage. "Technician, please display the transfer confirmation." The screen changed again. It showed a bank transfer document authenticated and time-stamped 5 minutes ago. It showed the movement of $200 million. The zeros stretched across the screen like a chain-link fence. But the destination account wasn't Brandon's. It wasn't mine. "Effective immediately," I announced, "the entire corpus of the Bennett Family Trust has been transferred to a new entity. It is now the Maya Bennett Charitable Foundation." A spotlight hit the service entrance. Maya stood there blinking in the sudden brightness. She looked terrified in her simple dress, clutching her purse with white knuckles. She looked small against the grandeur of the room. But she stood straight. She looked like a Bennett. This foundation, I continued, watching the realization dawn on Brandon's face, will focus on providing legal aid to victims of elder abuse and financial support for underprivileged students who are working their way through life without a silver spoon. It will be run by its CEO, my granddaughter Maya. Brandon turned to look at Maya. He stared at the daughter he had thrown away like trash 20 years ago. He looked at the hands that were rough from scrubbing tables, hands that now held the keys to his kingdom. He realized that the girl he had paid to disappear now owned his legacy. "You gave it to her," Brandon whispered, his voice amplified by the sudden hush of the room. She's a waitress. She's a nobody. She isn't even a real Bennett." "She is the only one of us who knows how to work," I replied, my voice hard. "She is the only one of us who hasn't been poisoned by entitlement. She is the future, Brandon. You are just a bad memory." Brandon fell to his knees. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. His legs just gave out. He knelt on the parquet floor, surrounded by the ruins of his reputation. The investors were leaving, streaming out the exits to avoid the stink of failure. The reporter was uploading his story. The party was over. "But what about me?" Brandon croaked. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. Real tears this time. Tears of a man who realizes he has lost the only thing he ever loved: money. "Dad, please, I have nothing. The sharks, they're outside. If I don't pay them, I am dead. You are killing me." I looked down at him. I felt a pang of pity, the ghost of the love I used to have for the little boy who scraped his knees and ran to me for comfort. But then I looked at the screen, frozen on the image of Vanessa mocking my pain, and I remembered the man wishing death on his mother. "You don't have nothing," I said softly. "You have exactly what your mother left you. You have exactly what you earned." I reached into the breast pocket of my tuxedo. I felt the paper there. It was warm from my body heat. I pulled it out. It was crisp. It was green. It was the $50 bill. I walked down the stairs of the stage. The few remaining guests parted for me like the Red Sea. I walked up to my kneeling son. I took his hand, which was limp and cold, clammy with the sweat of fear. I placed the bill in his palm. I closed his fingers around it. $50. I said, my voice echoing in the silent hall. "Buy yourself a nice dinner, son. Or maybe a bus ticket. It's up to you now." I straightened up. I adjusted my jacket. I looked at Vanessa, who was weeping silently in the corner, her makeup ruining the silk of her stolen dress, realizing her golden ticket had just been canceled. I looked at Maya, who was watching me with pride and a little bit of fear. I nodded to her. We had work to do. Then I turned and walked toward the exit. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. I was leaving behind the weight of 20 years. I was leaving behind the lie. As I pushed open the heavy doors of the ballroom, stepping out into the cool night air of New York City, I heard a single sound behind me. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a sob. It was the soft flutter of a crumpled piece of paper hitting the floor. He had dropped the $50. Even at rock bottom, he couldn't accept the only honest thing he had ever been given. I smiled. I walked to my truck, parked illegally right in front of the hotel, looking like a bruised thumb against the luxury sedans. A police officer was writing a ticket. He looked up as I approached, eyeing my tuxedo and my old truck. "Is this your truck, pal?" he asked. "You can't park this junk here." I took the ticket from his hand. I didn't argue. I didn't try to buy him off. "Sorry, officer," I said. "I was just taking out the trash." I climbed in, started the engine, and drove away, leaving the lights, the lies, and my son behind me in the rearview mirror. The road ahead was dark, but for the first time in a long time I knew exactly where I was going. I did not get far before the chaos spilled out onto the street. I pulled my truck to the curb half a block away and watched through the rearview mirror. It was the final act of the tragedy I had written, and I needed to see the curtain fall. The heavy brass doors of the Pierre Hotel burst open. It was not the guests leaving in an orderly fashion. It was a raid. Federal agents swarmed the entrance, their windbreakers stark against the evening gowns and tuxedos. They moved with the precision of a scythe through tall grass. Vanessa came out first. She was not walking. She was being dragged. Two female agents held her by the arms, her feet kicking uselessly at the pavement. The stolen silk dress was torn at the hem. Her hair was a wild tangle. She was screaming that she was a victim, screaming that she had been framed, screaming for a lawyer who would never come. They pushed her against the side of a squad car. I saw the glint of steel as they tightened the cuffs. She looked up at the cameras that had gathered the paparazzi flashes, exploding like mortar fire. For a woman who had lived for attention, she was finally getting it. Her face was a mask of ruined mascara and terror. She looked around frantically, searching for someone to save her, but there was no one. The guests who had been drinking her champagne 10 minutes ago were now filming her demise on their phones. Then came Brandon. He was not with the police. He was surrounded by 3 men in ill-fitting suits, men with dead eyes and heavy knuckles. The loan sharks had not waited for the wire transfer that never came. They had come to collect their collateral in person. Brandon looked small. The arrogance that had defined him for 40 years had evaporated, leaving only a trembling child in a tuxedo. One of the men had a grip on the back of his neck, steering him toward a black sedan with tinted windows. Brandon was sobbing. His legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the dirty sidewalk. The man hauled him up by his collar, whispering something in his ear that made my son go limp with fear. Brandon reached into his pocket with a shaking hand. He pulled out the only thing he had left. The $50 bill. He held it out to the enforcer, his eyes pleading. He offered it as if it were a fortune, as if it could buy his life back. The man looked at the crumpled green paper. He laughed a short, cruel bark that carried over the noise of the city. He slapped the bill out of Brandon's hand. It fluttered down into the gutter, landing in a puddle of black, oily water. The men shoved Brandon into the back of the sedan. He did not fight. He looked through the window, and for a second our eyes met across the distance. He saw me sitting in my old truck. He saw the father he had tried to bury. And in that look, I saw the final death of his pride. The sedan peeled away, merging into the uncaring traffic of New York City. The police van took Vanessa in the opposite direction. The sidewalk cleared. The lights of the gala dimmed. All that remained was the silence and a $50 bill soaking in the mud. I shifted my truck into gear. The engine hummed a steady, reliable sound. There was no joy in this victory. There was only the quiet, terrible peace of a job finished. I turned the wheel and drove into the night, leaving the wreckage of my family behind me. The sun came up over the Hamptons like a bruise healing into gold. The air was crisp, smelling of salt water and pine needles. I sat on the porch of my cabin, the wood rough against my back. It was the same porch where I had sat for 20 years of exile, but today the view was different. Today I was not looking at a prison. I was looking at a garden I had finally weeded. Maya sat across from me. She held a mug of coffee in both hands, letting the steam warm her face. She was not wearing a waitress uniform. She was wearing a blazer I had bought her yesterday. It was a little big in the shoulders, but she would grow into it. On the table between us lay the heavy leather binder of the Bennett Trust. "It is heavy," she said, tracing the gold lettering on the cover. "It is supposed to be," I replied. "If it ever feels light, you are doing it wrong." I pushed the binder toward her. Inside were the deeds, the accounts, the power. $200 million. It was enough to buy islands. It was enough to ruin a soul. But looking at Maya, I did not see greed. I saw the same girl who had defended herself against a bully for a plate of cold eggs. "You are the protector now, Maya," I said. "You sign the checks. You vet the charities. You make sure the money does the work it was meant to do." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with the magnitude of it. "What about you, Grandpa? What are you going to do, me?" I smiled. "I am going to fix the roof. It has been leaking since '98. And then I am going to go fishing." She laughed, a clear, bright sound that chased away the lingering shadows of the last few weeks. She stood up and picked up the binder. She did not clutch it like a prize. She held it like a tool. She kissed my cheek, whispered thank you, and walked toward her car. She had a meeting with the board of the animal shelter. She was not wasting time. I watched her go until her taillights disappeared down the drive. Then I went inside. I walked to the mantel where I had placed the only photo I had saved from the wreckage. It was a picture of Catherine and me taken 40 years ago, before the money, before the lies, before the heartbreak. We were young and we were covered in paint from renovating our first apartment. I touched the frame. "I did it, Cat." I whispered to the empty room. "I saved him. I had to break him to do it, but he is alive. And the girl, you would have loved her. She has your eyes. She has your fire." I sat down in my armchair. The silence of the cabin was not lonely anymore. It was peaceful. The war was over. The weeds were pulled. The garden was safe. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 20 years, I did not just sleep. I rested. I learned that a legacy is not built on bank accounts or bloodlines, but on character. For decades, I confused enabling with loving, thinking I could buy my son's redemption with my silence. I was wrong. True love sometimes requires the hardest no you will ever speak. It requires letting people fall so they can learn to stand. In the end, the richest man is not the one with the most zeros in his ledger, but the one who can look in the mirror and see a life lived with integrity. I found my true heir not in the mansion I built, but in the values I upheld. If you believe that respect must be earned and not inherited, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served.